We're going to start the show tonight by showing you a video the mainstream media does not want you to see. It's absolutely astounding. In the wake of the revelations by Inspector General Horowitz in his report and in his testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee, there is no way for the Democrats to deny monstrous FBI malfeasance. So what does the mainstream media do? The media simply refuse to focus on this footage that I'm about to show you, this exchange between Senator Lindsey Graham and Inspector General Horowitz from the Senate hearings yesterday. The mainstream media hopes that you won't see this. Since the mainstream media won't cover this, we will. Now, before I play this, there are two critical points to watch for. First of all, Inspector General Horowitz in this video admits that the FBI spied on the Trump campaign. Horowitz won't use that word, spying, but what else is it when the FBI surreptitiously sends an FBI agent to report on the members of the Trump campaign under the guise of briefing them on something else? Take a look at this.
This was opened up as a counterintelligence investigation, right?
Correct.
And we know the Russians were screwing around with the Democrats, right? That's one of the concerns. Correct. It was the Russians who acted in the DNC.
Correct.
Got their emails.
Correct.
So it's okay for everybody to be concerned. What are the Russians up to? I get that. It's okay to look at what's the standard to start one of these things?
There are two types of investigations. Both of them have relatively low thresholds, as we point out here, for predication.
Okay. So let's assume for a moment that relatively low threshold was met. Would it be fair to say that if you stop there and looking at your report, you're making a mistake?
You would be making a mistake. There is 400 pages here for a reason.
There's a mountain of misconduct. Please don't ignore it.
This is critically important for two reasons. The first being Senator Graham's point that if Democrats are only reading that one line of the Inspector General report and saying, well, there was adequate predication to open the investigation, but then ignoring everything else, then the Democrats and the mainstream media are being woefully biased. Second, and this is a point Graham did not make, but it's equally important, even if the legal standard to open a counterintelligence investigation was met initially, and it's a low standard to open that kind of probe, that does not mean that the standards to surveil a private citizen was adequately met. And if the FBI continued to surveil a private citizen, even when exculpatory evidence was uncovered in the course of this investigation, the fact that the original threshold was met to open the investigation to begin with has zero bearing on the legality of the continuing surveillance, especially if it was illegal. And here's where Horowitz admits that the FBI secretly surveilled the Trump campaign. Listen.
My point is, if this is a counterintelligence investigation, who are they trying to protect? Who should they be trying to protect?
Well, if it's the threat outlined in the friendly foreign government information, you would be looking to protect the election process,
right?
Which would include
the candidate,
the campaign, the candidate, and the American people.
Okay, so did they ever brief Hillary Clinton about efforts to foreign influences involving her campaign? Do you know?
I've heard that, but I don't know for a fact.
They did. Good for them. And they stopped it. Was there ever a defensive briefing given by the FBI, Department of Justice, to Donald Trump about the concerns?
There was not.
What would you call a counterintelligence investigation that never had a protective element?
I'm not sure. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, if without eventually trying to protect the entity being influenced, is it legitimate?
It would depend on each fact and circumstance.
Here's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah.
If you're opening up a counterintelligence investigation to protect somebody, you should do it. Did they ever try to protect Donald Trump from foreign influence?
They did not brief him, and we lay out on page 55.
As a matter of fact, when they went in and gave a vanilla briefing, the Russians are out there, you better beware. Didn't they have an FBI agent do a 302 on the defensive briefing itself?
They sent one of the supervisory agents from the Crossfire Hurricane team to the briefing, and that agent prepared a report to the file of the briefing.
About what Trump said.
About what Mr. Trump said and what Mr. Flynn said.
You heard it yourself. Don't let the Democrats tell you the Trump campaign wasn't spied on. This is proof of it from Horowitz himself. And then the next part of this video, this shows you the second major takeaway that I was talking about before. This part proves that the FBI lied to Congress. Watch the video first.
To those who can set aside how I feel about Trump for a minute, under the guise of protecting the campaign from Russian influence, they never lift a finger to protect the campaign. Every time they had information that the people they suspected were working for the Russians, it went the other way, and they kept going. When they did generically brief candidate Trump, they sent an FBI agent in to do a 302. If this doesn't bother you, you hate Trump way too much. Was that FBI agent spying on Donald Trump when he went in there?
It was a pretext meeting that I'm not going to, the process by which they have to do these meetings.
If you don't have a foundation for a warrant and you continue, I'm sorry, go ahead. Do you need to say anything else?
I'm sorry.
There's no, okay.
The incident, the event, the meeting was a briefing, and the FBI considered and decided to send that agent there to do the briefing. So the agent was actually doing the briefing, but also using it for the purpose of investigation.
Okay, now I hope that doesn't happen to us tomorrow. I'll be really pissed if it does.
There, right there, that proves the FBI lied to Congress. In 2017, Senator Chuck Grassley wrote a letter to the FBI asking if the FBI ever provided President Trump and his campaign with a defensive briefing about Russian meddling in the election, particularly if the FBI had any concerns about meddling with the Trump campaign directly. The FBI then wrote a letter back to Grassley saying, yes, the FBI briefed the Trump campaign. Well, it turns out, as you heard from Inspector General Horowitz himself, that was willful misdirection from the FBI. The FBI did not brief the Trump campaign on counterintelligence concerns regarding their campaign specifically. Just vague warnings that Russia's out there and Russia isn't a friend. And in that vague briefing, the FBI sent an agent to surveil members of the Trump campaign itself, including then-candidate Donald Trump. Breathtaking, isn't it? No wonder the Democrats, no wonder the mainstream media doesn't want you to focus on that video. With me now to break this down, senior fellow at Americans for Intelligence Reform, Chris Hall. Chris, good to see you.
Hi, Liz.
All right, Chris, we've been starting these segments about impeachment and all of these types of investigations with the same question, and that is, did we learn anything new? And I think for the first time in these hearings yesterday with Horowitz, we did indeed learn something new.
Yeah, no, I do. I do think that we did. With the release of this report and with the hearing, yes, I think we learned a great deal. And we had a whole bunch of the pieces of the puzzle, but we've been provided some more of them, you know, in this hearing and in a very long interview that Attorney General Barr did in order to lay out his perspective on the report and on the hearing. Yeah, I think we've learned a lot in the last week.
And Horowitz would not use the word spy. He would not use the word spying to define what the FBI did here to the Trump campaign. He fumbled his words quite a bit because he was quite obviously searching for a word to replace spying that has the same definition of spying. But I want to ask you, as someone who has been involved with the intelligence community, is such a meeting as this, a defensive briefing where the FBI sends an agent to write 302s. 302s are reports written by FBI agents on individuals that they have conducted an interview with. Does that constitute spying since the Trump campaign was unaware of it?
Yep. Yeah, this was spying. Yes, this was spying on Americans. I think that we actually have multiple instances over the course of not just this one meeting. We've now got, I mean, you could count up dozens. You have a systematic campaign to spy on Americans, including overseas intercepts, including lures that were dangled in front of people, including substantial budgets that were coming out of the Obama Pentagon Office of Net Assessment, including wiretap, the ability at least to do electronic surveillance, several jumps out from Carter Page, including Susan Rice, dozens, maybe hundreds of times through her National Security Council, revealing who the American identities were of individuals who were caught up supposedly in this foreign intelligence gathering. The Obama administration spied on the Trump campaign, absolutely, full stop.
I feel like after reading this Inspector General report and listening to Inspector General Horowitz's testimony, there can be no question of that. If there's a Democrat or if there's a mainstream media talking head who is denying this, then they are doing so out of bias, not because they are looking objectively at the truth here. You mentioned Attorney General Barr, and I want to show a video of Attorney General Barr talking about the case that the FBI had built collapsing around them and how they responded to that. Because it's okay, by the way, if you build a case and in the course of your investigation, you find evidence that makes your case collapse, that's okay. That happens. It is what you do with that information that is either right or wrong. This is Attorney General Barr. Take a listen.
Their case collapsed after the election, and they never told the court, and they kept on getting renewals on these applications. There was documents falsified in order to get these renewals. There was all kinds of withholding of information from the court. And the question really is, what was the agenda after the election that kept them pressing ahead after their case collapsed? This is the President of the United States.
And that, I think, puts to rest. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but that puts to rest the question of whether the malfeasance on the part of the FBI was a mistake or whether it was intentional. Because everything that Attorney General Barr listed there, you don't do that by mistake. That is not an accident that occurs in the course of doing what's right, which would be the definition of an acceptable mistake. This is an intentionally misleading, biased pattern of behavior from the FBI intended to target a private citizen.
It was. It absolutely was. In fact, Attorney General Barr is doing something throughout this interview that, and I'd encourage your viewers to watch the whole interview. It's about 25 minutes long. It is really brilliant. He actually has more information than we do, more information than is public, and you can tell from the way that he can draw the narrative out. But over and over, what he's doing is what is I think, a very positive and healthy thing. He's trying to infer what is the best explanation that can account for this pattern of facts. And he'll say things like, you heard something like this, but he also said that something was inexplicable. Specifically, he said, John Brennan, the head of the Obama CIA, went to the Russians. He went to the actual intelligence services, to his counterpart, and said, we know you're messing with our elections. Barack Obama himself went to Vladimir Putin, who's supposed to be the enemy here, and said, hey, we know you're messing with the elections. But they wouldn't tell Trump. He calls that inexplicable. I would say it's inexplicable if you're looking for a motive that is non-political. The motive here was political. This was, the motive here was to spy on and destroy a presidential candidate for the United States.
Right, and I think when you're talking about the rhetorical strategies Barr is using, the reason he says it's inexplicable is because he lays out a perfectly logical, almost like an addition problem. It's a train of logic. He says 2 + 2 + 2, and he leaves it to everyone to make to add that together and create a sum for themselves. That's why he says inexplicable, because you can add that up yourself. You can see that that equals bias. Chris, my last question to you is, U.S. Attorney John Durham issued a rebuke, in a sense, to Inspector General Horowitz, saying that a month ago, Durham had let Horowitz know that he disagreed with the material conclusions of the Inspector General's report. This is somewhat unprecedented to make a statement like this. Attorney General Barr said, given what he knows, it was not inappropriate of Durham to do this. But what does it mean to you that Durham would publicly rebuke Horowitz in this way? Does he have something that's so damning that Horowitz simply didn't have the jurisdiction to reveal?
Yes, yes, absolutely. He has, not only does he have jurisdictional advantages, he's actually also got tools that Horowitz didn't have. Yeah, this is because right now, we have seen this, the investigation that Durham is conducting expand beyond the FBI. This was never about the FBI in the first place. Remember that there was spying that was going on General Flynn starting in approximately 2015. Certainly a great deal happening in 2016. Let me give you just one example. In January of 2016, the Obama National Security Council met in the old Executive Office building, which is in the White House complex, with Ukrainian prosecutors. Does this sound familiar to you? According to Andrei Telezhenko, the Ukrainian ambassador who was, or embassy personnel staff, who was tasked with setting up the meetings, they talked about two things. The Obama administration wanted them to investigate the Party of Nations, that is Paul Manafort, and they wanted to stop investigating Burisma, that is Biden. I believe that Eric Ciaramella, who is almost certainly the whistleblower, the so-called whistleblower who's in fact a leaker, was in those meetings. The Obama administration was not conducting defensive meetings because it was conducting offensive operations against the Trump campaign and against the American people who supported him.
And that's what we'll have to wait for the Durham report to get the details on, because that's far and away beyond the jurisdiction of what Horowitz had the ability to investigate. And I believe that could be why Durham made this comment. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.